to return to sustainable levels over time, and immigration policy is under constant review.
Sarah Atherton.
Thank you. The Labour-Plaid coalition in Cardiff has declared Wales a sanctuary for all. The world is welcome. However, their Ukrainian super sponsor scheme fell apart due to lack of accommodation and planning, with families still crammed into one single room. So what discussions has the Minister had with the Welsh Labour government about the collapse of their super sponsor scheme? And does the Minister know how many families are still inappropriately placed?
Home Secretary.
Well, we are very proud of our track record in this country of providing sanctuary to people in need, and I'm very proud of the support that the government has given to Ukrainians fleeing Putin's barbaric war. But when it comes to broader accommodation costs relating to asylum seekers, it's clear we're spending far too much every day, £6 million a day, £3 billion a year on asylum seekers in hotels. But my honourable friend raises a very important point. She speaks, frankly, to Labour's abject failure to offer any viable plan when it comes to support. They're naive about the problem and they're unrealistic about the solution. Labour has absolutely no idea, no plan, and they're letting Wales down.
James Daly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Does the government have any plans to amend the minimum salary requirement for the skilled worker visa scheme?
Home Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, we always keep the salary threshold under review. But as I said, net migration is too high and we need to get overall numbers down. How do we do that? Well, employers need to recruit more people already here rather than advertise abroad so much. We also need to get more people off welfare and back into economic activity, and our welfare reforms will help that objective. And we cannot ignore the pressures that record levels of people coming to the UK put on housing supply, public services and on community relations. That's why we need to focus on lowering net migration.
Tim Farron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of course, in some parts of the UK, net emigration is the problem, and I wonder if the Home Secretary would pay attention to the plight of our economy in the Lakes and the Dales, when almost 2/3 of businesses are failing to be able to meet their capacity of the demand that's out there because of a lack of a workforce. I've been speaking to her right honourable friend about a youth mobility visa scheme negotiated bilaterally with other countries in Europe to solve our economic needs here so that our hospitality and tourism industry can survive. Will she tell me how she's getting on with those discussions?
Home Secretary.
Well, migration is a very complex issue, and of course we have to balance the needs of the labour market. And that's why we're very pleased to support particularly and well-crafted youth mobility schemes. One with India. I've just come back from New Zealand, where we've expanded the youth mobility scheme there. They're great schemes whereby there can be the exchange of young people and they can come here to serve and work in our economy.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State very much for the response. It's very clear that the issue of migration must be settled and sorted out. At the same time, in my constituency of Strangford, it's very important to have those who have come from Eastern Europe, those who have come from the Middle East, those who have come from Africa as well, who contribute to the economy. So when it comes to net migration, I think the Secretary of State is very committed to ensuring that continues. But what discussions has the Secretary of State had with the Northern Ireland Assembly in relation to this matter to ensure that we can continue to have the workers that we need? Thank you.
Home Secretary.
Well, there's no single measure which can be used to control net migration. But as the Prime Minister has been clear, net migration is too high. That's why I announced a series of measures recently aimed at the number of students, which has exponentially risen in the last few years, focusing on the number of student dependents and ensuring that students come here in a much more proportionate and balanced way.
We now come to Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Home Secretary wish the Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party a speedy recovery from the terrible sick bug which I understand has prevented him from launching this morning an entirely different Conservative immigration policy to the policy of the Conservative Home Secretary? And does she agree with him that social care visas should be cancelled? Yes or no?
Home Secretary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the sorry fact of the matter here is that Labour want open borders and unlimited migration. And there's a real malaise descending upon the Labour Party. They don't even know what they think, to be honest. Labour's Sadiq Khan has said he wants more migration. Labour's party chairman has confirmed that numbers could rise under a Labour government. And the Shadow Home Secretary, when she was asked about whether she wanted net migration to rise or fall, in characteristic style that we've come to know and love, couldn't even answer the question. Mr. Speaker, that's what you always get with Labour.
Order. Can I just say you've no responsibility for the Labour Party? I think, in fairness, it is Home Office questions. Yvette Cooper.
Well, the Home Secretary couldn't answer the question. Does she support her own social care visas or not? She spent all weekend briefing that she agrees with her backbenchers, but today she can't even answer the basic question. Making up stuff about the Labour Party won't help her when her party has been in power for 13 years and where work visas have doubled exactly because they have failed to tackle skills shortages or tackle issues in the labour market. This is total chaos. We've got a Rwanda policy that isn't removing anyone, an impact assessment which says her policies won't work and will cost much more, a 50% drop in removals of foreign criminals because the inspector says the Home Office can't even identify who can be removed, record number of people in hotels, record high asylum backlog, and backbenchers writing her immigration policy because they don't think she's up to the job. It's been a humiliating few weeks for the Home Secretary.
Order! Sorry, I'm not going to take advantage of him in that way. That is totally unfair. I can't pull one side up for the other to take advantage of it. I expect all the backbenchers to be able to get their questions in today. It is about everybody getting the same involvement, so please don't do that again. Home Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We all know that it's only this side of the House, it's only the Conservative Party, it's only this Prime Minister that has a serious plan to stop the boats and stop illegal migration, and that Labour only stands for one thing: open borders, unlimited migration. They'd rather spend their time campaigning to block the deportation of foreign criminals than back our illegal migration bill. They're on the side of the criminal gangs, not on the side of the British people.
Roddy Callan.
Question number 2, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member will recall that we met, the two of us, just a few weeks ago on May the 17th, together with industry representatives, to discuss the issue of hemp licensing. And I thank him for taking the time and trouble to organise that meeting. There is, as he knows, a light touch process for licensing industrial hemp. And in fact, since 2013, the number of hemp licences has increased from 6 up to 134.
Cowan.
I recollect the conversation well, but we have an opportunity within the UK to grow hemp on an industrial scale, and from that feed many growing industries that use hemp to produce environmentally friendly products. The growth of these industries has been hampered by overly complicated regulations and a poor application process. Meanwhile, foreign companies are racing ahead in this arena. To protect UK farmers and encourage UK industry, will the Minister consider giving the licensing process over to DEFRA and make the process farmer-friendly?
Well, it is, of course, important to make sure that UK industry can compete globally, and a light-touch regulatory framework is important to that. We should, of course, be conscious that some parts of the plant contain high levels of THC and do need regulation, which is the Home Office's concern. But I can tell him I'm meeting DEFRA colleagues in the very near future to make sure that our approach to regulation is as light touch as possible, because like him, I do want to see our domestic industry flourish, and like him, I don't want to see any excessive regulation.
Andrew Slew.
Number 3, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government has said it will be reviewing the funding formula, and I hope to have news for the House in the relatively near future about initiating the consultation process. It is the case that the funding formula, the police funding formula, is quite out of date. It does need overhauling, and that is something we're working on.
The record 1,455 number of police officers in Bedfordshire and the recent £6 million special grant are both very welcome indeed. But does the Police Minister recognise that it is simply not fair or right to go on funding a force with a series of one-off special grants which really do need to be part of core funding?
Well, I think my honourable friend makes a good point, and I should take this opportunity to pay tribute to the Bedfordshire Police and Crime Commissioner, Festus Akimbusoye, who has done a fantastic job for the people of Bedfordshire, advocating for more funding via the special grant, and he was successful in doing that. He is a great representative for the people of Bedfordshire, and I'm pleased that he has delivered record police numbers in Bedfordshire, just as the government have delivered record ever numbers of police across the whole of England and Wales.
Shadow Minister Holly Lynch.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Chief Constable of West Yorkshire Police, John Robbins QPM, recently told the BBC that his force does not have the resources it needs to deliver the service the public expects. Cutting through the spin, he said the force had been down 2,000 staff and £140 million since 2010. He said it could deal with major incidents and crimes, but only at a cost to neighbourhood policing. This is from a force that was rated outstanding in planning and the use of resources in its latest HMIC FRS inspection. So which bit of policing does the Minister think should not be done because forces simply haven't got the resources?
Minister.
Well, the Shadow Minister will, of course, know that in the police funding settlement for this year, 23-24, there is an extra around about £500 million, in fact, slightly over £500 million, for police forces up and down the country, which has enabled us to deliver a record-ever number of officers, 149,572 officers, around about 3,500 more than under the last Labour government. In West Yorkshire, which you asked about, neighbourhood crime is down by 30% since 2019, and overall crime, excluding fraud and computer misuse, which only came into the figures recently, since 2010, is down by 52%. And I'm still waiting for the Shadow Home Secretary to apologise for being a member of a government that presided over crime levels double those we have today.
Chiomoro.
Number 4, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
Mr Speaker, with your permission, I'll group this question with question 21. We're making good progress, and the latest Home Office statistics show asylum decisions are up, with a 35% increase in asylum decisions from last year. Productivity has increased, and we're on track to have 2,500 decision makers by September, which represents a quadrupling of the number of caseworkers.
John Moore.
Like many members across the House, I'm constantly being contacted by refugees desperate to know what is happening to their asylum after years of waiting. So I asked the Home Office how many refugees in Newcastle had been waiting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and the answer came back. They don't know. They don't even record the data. So instead of indulging in unworkable, unethical, illegal and unaffordable flights of Rwandan fantasy, why doesn't the Home Secretary focus on her day job and fix the asylum backlog?
Minister.
Well, as I've just said, we are making good progress on reducing the current asylum backlog. But important though the backlog is, it can't be the totality of a plan. And this is the point that the party opposite don't seem to understand. You have to stop the boats coming in the first place. That is the only sustainable way to tackle the issue. And even if you grant your way out of this problem, as seems to be what the Shadow Home Secretary proposes, the pressures to the state still remain. They're simply transferred to local authorities and the benefits system, and the British taxpayer continues to pick up the bill.
Well, that's an interesting definition of being on track, because haven't the number of decision makers actually fallen from January to May this year, from 1,333 to 1,280? I had a letter recently from passed on to me by a constituent from a local solicitor, saying all possible avenues have been considered to avoid this situation, but regrettably the Home Office's long-term failure to progress asylum claims and current government immigration policy has made it financially unsustainable for this solicitors to continue legally aided work. How does it help us as MPs on both sides of the House in our constituency offices and the backlog that the Home Office says it wants to reduce by making sure people don't have the legal representation they actually need to unblock the system and allow progress in these cases?
Minister.
Well, I can assure the honourable gentleman that the problem with our asylum system is not the lack of lawyers. There's plenty of legal representatives around. We've had strong overall progress on the backlog, and I'm pleased to say that the early data that I've received suggests that last week saw the best performance in 4 years.
Tim Lawton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know how seriously the Minister takes dealing with the legacy backlog, but as the Home Secretary showed at the recent Home Affairs Select Committee, in order to deal with that backlog in the time frame the government has set itself, it would require at least a quadrupling of the number of cases being dealt with as from the 1st of June. And even with the extra 500 at Stoke just appointed, that is going to be challenging. So will the Minister give me assurance that if we've not actually managed to clear the backlog before the end of the year, that it will not be done by a blanket amnesty?
Minister.
Well, my honourable friend makes an important point, and the Home Secretary, the Prime Minister and I explicitly chose not to pursue the blanket amnesty approach that the last Labour government pursued. Instead, we put the hard yards in to improve productivity by streamlining processes, reducing unnecessary bureaucracy, ensuring that where appropriate interviews were conducted in a timely fashion, and recruiting more decision makers. Since my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, appeared before the committee, I'm pleased to say that the data coming out of our caseworking team is very strong. We are seeing significant progress. As I just said, the last week, the early indication suggests was the best for over 4 years.
Sir Edward Lee.
I'm a bit mystified. Given that 95% of these applications are successful, surely if you speed up the process and make it easier and easier, just more and more people will come. Isn't the only solution actually to detain people and to deport them, offshore them? And those that suggest anything else are living in cloud cuckoo land, and every single county is going to face what we face in Lincolnshire, with thousands of illegal migrants have to be housed in unsuitable places. Let's have an answer for once.
Well, the approach that the Home Secretary and I have taken has been both to ensure that where there are high grant rate nationalities, cases are pursued swiftly, but also where there are very low grant rates, like Albanians, where these are individuals from a safe European country and can and should be returned as quickly as possible, that we do just that. And at this point in the year, last year, 30% of those arriving from on small boats were coming from Albania. Today, it's less than 2%. So that arrangement is making good progress. But my right honourable friend does make an important point, which is that those who suggest you can simply grant your way out of this problem, I'm afraid, are hopelessly naive. The idea that the individuals coming across on small boats are, in the most cases, going to make a significant net contribution to our economy are wrong. The costs to the taxpayer are very significant. The ongoing support in terms of education, access to welfare and community cohesion are very significant, and that's why we need to stop the boats in the first place.
Shadow Minister Stephen Kinnock.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The government's destruction of its own asylum system can best be described as an act of arson, and its plans to fix it are utterly farcical. They've sent more Home Secretaries than asylum seekers to Rwanda. Yeah. They sent the Prime Minister on a victory lap in Dover, apparently failing to notice that the weather improves over the summer and the boat numbers increase. And they were in such a flap about losing votes on their bigger backlog bill that they resorted to dragging Lord Lebedev of Siberia into the division lobbies. Now the Court of Appeal ruling has revealed that Rwanda is only able to process 100 claims per year, around 0.3% of those who arrived on small boats last year. So can the Minister tell me what he's planning to do with the remaining 99.7%? And does he therefore agree with me that the prospect of the Rwanda plan actually deterring any migrant from crossing the Channel is close to zero?
Well, I used to say that the Labour Party don't have a plan, but the truth is they do have a plan. It's a plan that would make things significantly worse. It's a plan that will ensure more granting of cases, more safe and legal routes, so even more individuals come here, more hotels, more cost to the British taxpayer. And what I think is so disgraceful is the level of hypocrisy. And you only have to look at the record of Labour Wales to see that. In Wales, the Welsh Minister for Social Justice declared Labour-run Wales a nation of sanctuary in the Senate on 15 occasions. But across the same period, Labour-run Wales accommodated 176 fewer asylum seekers. In fact, the latest published data shows that Labour-run Wales are taking just half the number of people that they should be per capita.
Chris Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Number 5.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have regularly engaged with the devolved administrations on the illegal migration bill since its introduction in March, in addition to my periodic meetings with my ministerial counterparts on a variety of immigration issues. Most recently, I met with the Scottish Minister for Equalities, Migration and Refugees in May. Looking ahead, the bill is on the agenda for the Interministerial Group for Safety, Security and Migration, which my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, will chair later this month.
Christie.
Thank the Minister for that answer, but this bill will place restrictions on the powers of Scottish ministers, removing the entitlement for victims of human trafficking and exploitation to access Scottish Government-funded support services, and will undermine the Scottish Government's ability to deliver on its own trafficking and exploitation strategy. Now, we know the route that the Government's damaging ideology is dragging this Government down, but why should Scotland's elected Parliament and those of devolved administrations be dragged down the same route when it's abundantly clear we want no part of that hostile environmental ideology?
Mr. Speaker, if the Scottish Government cared so deeply about this issue, they would accommodate more asylum seekers. The SNP government is accommodating just 4.5% of the total asylum population being accommodated in the UK, when Scotland makes up 8.1%. And I took the time to look at some of the statistics for those local authorities in Scotland where the SNP are the largest party. Clackmannanshire, 0 asylum seekers. Dundee, 0 asylum seekers. East Ayrshire, 0. East Dunbartonshire, 0. Midlothian, 0. North Ayrshire, want to take a guess, Mr. Speaker? 0. North Lanarkshire, 6.
No, you are. No. You're going to get my drift. We can't read out phone numbers. This is not the Yellow Pages advert. So please, one statistic, two statistics. When I get to 5, I really have got to worry. Now then, let's have the SNP spokesperson, Patrick Rady.
Speaker, he clearly thinks that this is a very clever line, but he knows well that Glasgow takes more refugees per head of population than any other local authority in the whole of the United Kingdom. And this line that he's trotting out is simply wrong, and it's insulting to everyone in Scotland who's opened their homes to Ukrainians, the communities across the country who've welcomed Syrians, and the volunteers in the big city who work with asylum seekers every day, helping them to overcome trauma. If he wants Scotland to do more to welcome refugees, when is he going to devolve the power and the financial levers that would allow us to do so?
Minister. Mr. Speaker, for good reason, immigration is a reserved matter, but the statistics that I just read out make the point as clearly as can be. They try their very best to undermine the government's work to stop the boats, but they refuse to accommodate these people when they arrive. And the costs of their fake humanitarianism are borne by everyone but themselves. It's not just hypocrisy, it's deeply irresponsible, and the public have had enough.
Patrick Rady.
It's not the Scottish Government's policy towards immigration, refugees and asylum seekers that have been ruled unlawful by the Court of Appeal. If he wants the system to work and he wants the Scottish Government to do its part, then what he needs to do is more action to clear the backlog, as we've heard. There needs to be proper, safe and legal routes for people to arrive, and then give them the right to work when they get here, because then they can pay for their own accommodation and they won't cost the taxpayers money.
Mr. Speaker, just the other day, the Home Office suggested to the Scottish Government that a vessel that had been used to house Ukrainian refugees in Leith could be used for others who are asylum seekers. The same vessel, the same port, the same provider, the same package. What did the SNP say? No.
Adam Casey.
Question number 6, please, Mr. Speaker.
Home Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While I'm pleased that the Court of Appeal found that the Government is not in breach of our obligations under the Refugee Convention, I fundamentally disagree with the judgment that Rwanda is not a safe place for refugees, and we are seeking permission to appeal. The Government takes its international obligations very seriously, and we are satisfied that the provisions in the Illegal Migration Bill comply with the Refugee Convention. But the fundamental principle remains. Those in need of protection should claim asylum at the earliest opportunity and in the first safe country that they reach.
Adam Casey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Home Secretary and the Government's own website say that they're satisfied that the provisions in the Illegal Migration Bill comply with the 1951 UN Refugee Convention. But I'm looking for clarity from the Home Secretary. What exactly is it about persecuting the most vulnerable groups, creating a hostile environment and stripping people of the right to seek safety that complies so well with the UN Refugee Convention?
Home Secretary.
Well, as I've made clear, we take our international obligations very seriously and we are satisfied that the bill complies with the Refugee Convention. But, Mr Speaker, with respect to the Honourable Lady, I'm not going to take lectures from the SNP on this matter. They are, as my right honourable friend said, they're the phony humanitarians in this debate who are happy to support asylum seekers as long as they're nowhere near Scotland. Exactly. And when they stop opposing the vessel in Leith, which will house more asylum seekers, then we can have a serious conversation.
Philip Oliver.
The UN Refugee Agency itself has its own asylum seeker relocation programme. It flies asylum seekers from Libya to Rwanda on a scheme part funded by the European Union. So how on earth can Rwanda be deemed not to be a safe country if the UN Refugee Agency itself is using it as a safe haven?
Home Secretary.
As always, my honourable friend makes a very powerful point, and I couldn't agree more with what he said. The UNHCR runs a very extensive scheme in Rwanda and supports the resettlement of many thousands of migrants. I've met some of them in my recent visit to Rwanda. They are happy and they are grateful for the generosity and welcome that Rwanda has offered them and allowed them to restart their lives. And I'm frankly very disappointed by the constant smears and assumptions which are frankly based on outdated and ignorant views, denigrating our allies in Rwanda. I am nothing but grateful to our partners in Rwanda for their continued cooperation.
Gordon Henderson.
Question number 7, Mr Speaker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, I'm pleased to report that since 2010, according to the Crime Survey, violence is down by 41% and criminal damage is down by 68%. But we'd like to do more. That's why we have now record ever numbers of police, why we're investing in the Safer Streets Fund, 200 million for the Youth Endowment Fund, and £170 million for the Violence Reduction Unit. We're also we have already launched our antisocial behaviour strategy that the Home Secretary will speak about in a moment. But now is a good time, I think, to put on record an intervention made by Mr Speaker in his capacity as Member of Parliament for Chorley. Thanks to his recent intervention with me and with the Chief Constable, Chorley Town Centre is one of those areas that will receive antisocial behaviour hotspot patrols, and I'm sure the people of Chorley are very grateful to Mr Speaker for the intervention he made on their behalf.
Gordon Henderson.
Well done, Mr Speaker. I'd like to thank the Minister for his reply, but some young people who are arrested because they've been guilty of antisocial behaviour or so-called low-level crime are released without charge because there is a reluctance to criminalise them. Too often, these youngsters go on to commit further multiple crimes and are arrested and released without charge each time. What steps will my right honourable friend take to end this roundabout of unpunished crime and ensure that young people who repeatedly break the law are not released without charge but are treated as what they are, which is criminals?
Minister.
Well, we do want to see tougher action on things like antisocial behaviour and on public drug use. We should have no tolerance, zero tolerance for any of those things. One of the things we are now launching as part of the ASB strategy is instant justice, where people who perpetrate acts of antisocial behaviour will very rapidly, ideally within 48 hours, be made to do clean-up in their local area, those kind of things, to pay back visibly, publicly, rapidly, and with enforcement. We're trialling that in 10 police force areas starting this month, July, and it'll be rolled out to every single police force in the country with funding by April of next year. So I completely agree with everything my honourable friend said.
Vicky Foxcroft.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Minister may not be aware that I was chair of the Cross-Party Youth Violence Commission. We published an interim report in 2018 and a final one in 2020. And our first recommendation was that the government adopt a public health approach to tackling violence through regional violence reduction units and long-term strategies. So what action is the Minister taking to ensure that violence reduction units have the long-term funding they need to achieve the best possible outcomes?
Minister.
Well, I do agree with the approach the Honourable Lady just set out, and we have already taken action. She asked about long-term plans. She'll be aware the Youth Endowment Fund, which has £200 million, is a 10-year programme. She'll be aware that violence reduction units, in some places called violence reduction partnerships, have so far received £170 million, and they receive funding each and every year, including an allocation this year. And the kind of things that we find work include diversionary activities for young people. And in fact, the chief executive of the YET told me when I asked him what the most effective intervention is, he said it was cognitive behavioural therapy, which gets used as well. But I would just repeat, Mr. Speaker, just one statistic, which I mentioned earlier. Since 2010, violence is down by 41%, criminal damage down by 68%.
Shadow Minister Sarajah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A report today found that nearly half of women who experienced or witnessed a crime in the past year chose not to report it because they don't believe that the police would treat it seriously. His Majesty's Inspector, in his latest State of the Nation report, said the police are experiencing one of their biggest crises in living memory. There are widespread systematic failings and they simply aren't getting the basics right. So my question to the Minister is, having pushed our British model of policing by consent to the very brink, does the government take responsibility? Do they agree with the Inspector that substantial reform is essential? Will they back Labour's plans to restore neighbourhood policing, halve serious violence and raise confidence in every force? Or is he happy to keep twiddling his thumbs while the criminals get away with it?
Well, I must say, in the gentlest terms, my constituency neighbour has a bit of a cheek talking about reducing crime when crime levels, according to the crime survey, were around about double under the last Labour government than they are today. I mean, she shakes her head, but it's the Office for National Statistics, and it is the only statistically recognised long-term measure of crime, according to the ONS. So if she doesn't like the ONS figures, she can go and argue with them. She may not like them, but those are the figures. In relation to her quite serious question about Rasso and other serious assaults, particularly on women, the proportion being reported is much higher now than it has been a few years ago, and that is to be welcomed. There is a lot more to do, which is why there is a rape review and a rape action plan, and my honourable friend, the Home Secretary, and my honourable friend, the Safeguarding Minister, are working hard on that. Operation Soteria Bluestone is fully rolled out by the end of June, just a few days ago, and we are seeing significant increases in the number of relevant charges, but they are still too low. They do need to go higher, and that is why we're investing in more Rasso specialist officers, and that work is continuing.
Mike Ainsbury.
Question number 9, Mr. Speaker.
Correct. Full marks. Any prize top shelf, help yourself.
Doesn't need to sound so uncertain. Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I'd like to group this with number 14. Earlier in the year, Mr. Speaker, I launched the Antisocial Behaviour Action Plan, increasing funding for police and crime commissioners by over £100 million, delivering stronger and swifter punishment, increasing police visibility and response, and banning nitrous oxide. Antisocial behaviour is not a low-level crime. It blights communities, and that's why this government is committed to tackling it effectively.
Mike Ainsbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, to coincide with Antisocial Behaviour Awareness Week, the All-Parliamentary Group with Resolve, the ASB charity, have published a report with, amongst other things, demonstrates that 1.7 million people per day experiencing antisocial behaviour. 58% believe the government is not doing enough. Would the Home Secretary meet with me and members of the All-Parliamentary Group to look at the recommendations in that report?
Home Secretary.
Well, I really thank the honourable gentleman for his work on the all-party parliamentary group, and I'm sure the Policing Minister and or myself will meet with him to learn more about the vital work that he's been leading. But let me just take this opportunity to applaud the officers in his area, in Cheshire Police Force. I've had the pleasure of meeting the excellent Chief Constable Mark Roberts. I applaud the Conservative Police and Crime Commissioner John Dwyer, who's rolled out a scheme on antisocial behaviour, rolling out more CCTV and increasing the first responder response. There's a record number of police officers in Cheshire. They've received over £3 million worth of Safer Streets funding, and What are the results? A 26% fall in neighbourhood crime and a 17% fall in drugs offences in Cheshire. That's common sense policing thanks to the police officers and government support.
Stephen Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hampshire and Isle of Wight Police is one of the lowest funded forces in the UK, and with a decade of cuts to youth services, antisocial behaviour has been left to thrive under this government. We've seen the consequences of this at South Parade Pier, at the Camber and at many other places in Portsmouth. Neighbourhood policing is vital to crack down on ASB, which ruins so many lives. Therefore, what explanation can the Home Secretary provide for halving the number of PCSOs over the last 13 years?
Home Secretary.
Well, the Honourable Gentleman and I represent constituencies which are served by the same police force, and I am really proud actually of the track record in Hampshire. I'm really proud of how the new Chief Constable, Scott Chilton, has assumed his role with real focus on back to basics policing. I'm really proud of how the Conservative Police and Crime Commissioner, Donna Jones, has led initiatives so that every community in Hampshire will have named, dedicated police officers and PCSOs serving them, really bolstering neighbourhood policing and building confidence. And I'm really proud of the fact that Hampshire has seen a 15% fall in neighbourhood crime since 2019. Common sense policing serving the community.
Crab.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that some of the principal victims of antisocial behaviour are young people? And so it's absolutely right what the government is doing, bringing forward new measures to tackle antisocial behaviour, to make safer our streets, our parks, our public spaces for the vast majority of young people who don't engage in those negative behaviours.
Home Secretary.
My right honourable friend is absolutely correct in what he says. There's such a need for greater diversion and greater support for young people so that they don't spend their time loitering in shopping centres or causing a nuisance in car parks or harassing members of the community. That's why our Antisocial Behaviour Action Plan commits considerable funding. It's over £160 million worth of new funding, including funding for an increased police presence in ASB hotspot areas and funding to support the rollout of diversionary resources to support young people so that they don't fall into crime, they don't fall into antisocial behaviour.
Youth zones are exceptional, especially the Trolley Inspire one. Robbie Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yet again in Ilkley and in Marley, in my constituency, travellers have set up camp, caused damage, intimidated residents, which just last weekend resulted in Ilkley Pool having to temporarily close. And when they have gone, they leave a complete mess, which all then has to be cleaned up at taxpayers' expense. So will the Home Secretary meet with me to discuss what additional support West Yorkshire Police and our local council can get to address this ongoing issue?
Home Secretary.
Well, my honourable friend raises a really important point about illegal encampments and travellers who blight communities by causing a nuisance and threatening, in some cases, communities. It's unacceptable behaviour. That's why we legislated in the Police Crime and Sentencing Act to toughen up the powers and the measures available to the police so they can take more robust steps in relation to this issue. But yeah, I'm very happy to speak to him about what more can be done locally.
Paulette Hamilton.
Question number 10, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I'll group this question with number 15. The Home Office seeks to end the use of hotels and move asylum seekers to less expensive and more suitable accommodation. To support this, we're bringing into use large disused military sites and vessels, which will provide adequate, safe, secure, non-detained accommodation for asylum seekers, which also reduce the pull factor to the United Kingdom.
Paulette Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently received an email from the Home Office which said that the use of hotels to house asylum seekers is inappropriate and that reliance on them must be reduced. In the same email, the Home Office informed me that they plan to increase the use of hotel accommodation for asylum seekers in my constituency of Erdington by 159%. This represents the single biggest increase in the whole of Birmingham. So can the Minister tell me how on earth he can expect the country to trust him when he can't even keep his policies consistent in the same email?
Minister.
Well, the policy that we've adopted is one of maximising the capacity of the hotels that we have for as long as we have them. That's saving the taxpayer at least £250 million, and it's reducing the reliance upon hotels elsewhere in the country. I do appreciate that there are pressures on her local authority, and I also appreciate that there are some Labour local authorities, like Westminster City Council, that say that asylum seekers must be housed in individual ensuite bedrooms. We don't agree with that. That's a gross waste of taxpayers' money and would make the UK a soft touch.
Jeff Smith.
Well, Mr. Speaker, in my constituency, I've had the same experience as my colleague from Erdington. But the question I wanted to ask was about unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. The Home Office still hasn't explained how they're going to find these children that are missing from asylum accommodation. So will they set out what the plans are to do this and find these vulnerable people?
Minister.
Well, we've been very clear that we and the police take any young person who goes missing from a hotel or any other form of accommodation extremely seriously. Local police forces and Home Office personnel treat that exactly as they would do any other child going missing and conduct the full missing persons inquiry. But the only sustainable answer to young people living in hotels is to stop the boats in the first place. Doing nothing is not an option. Doing nothing will lead to more young people living in those hotels being exposed to human traffickers.
James Gray.
While I do very much welcome the Minister's determination to move away from hotels and towards other accommodation, will you give particular attention to the Wiltshire Hotel and Golf Club in my own constituency, which has gone up in numbers, now 120 people there. They're all crammed into a very small accommodation. It's not only bad from the point of view of the golf club members and from the point of view of the neighbouring long-term residents housing next door, but it's also an extremely bad place from the point of view of the asylum seekers. They have nowhere to go, they have nothing to do, they have no education facilities, they've got no religious facilities, they are stuck there in the middle of the countryside with no transport. It's quite the wrong place for them to be. Will the Minister please give particular attention to the Wiltshire Hotel?
Well, I'm familiar with the hotel and his constituency and the concerns that he's raised. I will take a look at that, but as I said previously, the answer to this challenge is to stop the boats coming in the first place. And that is why we all need to support the illegal migration bill. If you want more hotels, you would oppose it. The Labour Party's policy will see more hotels. The shadow Home Secretary will end up with more hotels to her name than Paris Hilton.
Rachel Fuller.
Thank you. I don't know how to follow that, Mr. Speaker. All members would like to see a reduction in the number of hotels used for asylum accommodation. I'm sure that's true. But will the Minister just spend a moment to congratulate the community of Sharnbrook, and in particular Reverend Paolo De Leo and Councillor Doug McMurdo, in actually providing a welcoming environment for people who are put in such accommodation? I think there are signs across the country where communities do come together in these difficult circumstances to achieve an outcome that's beneficial for everyone.
Minister.
Well, I'd be very happy to put on my record the good work being done by his constituents. He's right to say that there are voluntary and community groups, charities and churches right across the country who are supporting asylum seekers whilst they're in this form of accommodation, and we and our providers facilitate that wherever possible.
Kelly Tonhurst in Topicals.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Home Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to make a short topical statement. The information that Meta and other tech companies give to UK law enforcement helps to protect around 1,200 children and leads to over 100 arrests of suspected child abusers every month. But Meta plans to roll out end-to-end encryption soon without safeguards. They will no longer proactively detect and alert authorities to child grooming and abuse material on Facebook Messenger and Instagram Direct. This will be a huge boon to anyone who wants to hurt a child. The online safety bill will hold tech firms to account, but indifference to abuse is intolerable. I've written to Mark Zuckerberg, along with my right honourable friend, the Security Minister, children's charities, campaign groups, to outline our profound concerns. And last week, I was in New Zealand at the Five Eyes Security Conference, where there was widespread support for working together to ensure social media companies put child safety first.
Kelly Tolhurst.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Following recent knife crime incidents in my constituency and within the Medway towns, will my right honourable friend meet with me and our Kent Police Crime Commissioner, Matthew Scott, to discuss funding and how the Home Office can further support Kent Police with the increased challenges that we are facing in Kent due to our proximity to London?
Home Secretary.
Well, I very much appreciate the particular challenges in Kent relating to knife crime. And that's why I'm very glad that since 2019, Kent has received £5.5 million in core violence reduction unit grant funding and £730,000 in additional support for targeted youth interventions. I have met with the Police and Crime Commissioner. I have also met with the Chief Constable, Tim Scott. They are both excellent at leading their forces. There is now a record number of police officers in Kent. I'm sure the Policing Minister will meet my honourable friend to discuss this particular issue. But there's a lot of progress, but we can do better.
Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Home Secretary will be aware of the documentary last week on the relationship between Boris Johnson and others and former KGB officer Alexander Lebedev about their meeting in an Italian villa, ignoring of security advice and Lord's appointments, and the decision not to sanction Alexander Lebedev. Given the importance of national security, will she tell the House whether she has any concerns about these reports, and will she set up an independent investigation into what happened, into who knew what, and into how far the security risk spreads?
Home Secretary.
Well, at the Home Office, the Security Minister and myself take very seriously the threats posed by hostile state actors. That's why my right honourable friend, the Security Minister, is chairing a Defending Democracy task force, bringing together agencies, government departments and a cross-Whitehall approach to tackling the very serious threats that we all face as parliamentarians, as those in public office. And I gently remind her that one of her own parliamentary colleagues has a very dubious track record when it comes to working with the Chinese Communist Party.
Selene Saxby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. What steps is my right honourable friend taking to ensure that police funding reflects rurality and the huge uplift in population experienced in remote coastal locations during the summer tourist season?
Well, as I said in response to an earlier question, it is the government's intention to consult in due course on a new police funding formula, and part of that consultation will involve looking at the factors that should be taken into account. Those might include things like population and crime levels, but things like rurality, sparsity and seasonality, particularly seasonal tourism, are likely to form part of the new formula, and I would encourage members on both sides to engage closely with the consultation when it comes forward to make sure those factors are properly accounted for.
Ronnie Cowan.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I refer members to my register of interests. In recent weeks, the media have carried stories of patients who were receiving medical cannabis on private prescriptions that are now having their prescriptions paid for by the NHS. On the surface, this is a great leap forward, but parents of children with intractable epilepsy who have been asking for this for years are still being ignored. Would the Home Office consider reopening the 2018 licensing scheme to enable the children already being privately prescribed to have access via their NHS GP?
Minister.
Well, I think many of the cannabis-based compounds were a few years ago wholesale moved to Schedule 2, enabling them to be prescribed. The question about NHS prescription that he asked is a perfectly reasonable, perfectly fair question, but of course prescriptions on the NHS are a matter for DHSC and for the NHS, including, I suppose, the NHS in Scotland. I'd be very happy to pass on his inquiry to them.
On Henderson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I assure my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, that a majority of my constituents in Sittingbourne and Sheffield understand that sending illegal migrants to Rwanda for processing is key to stopping small boat crossings in the Channel. So will she assure them that despite the concerted opposition from the Labour Party, that she will deliver her plan?
Secretary.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for the question. We are disappointed by the judgment of the Court of Appeal, but we're determined to follow through. He's right to say that we have to add deterrent to the system. It's only by breaking the business model of the people smugglers that we'll stop the boats.
Policing. Kim McGuinness, the Northumbria Police and Crime Commissioner, has put in place a redeployment programme to get an extra 134 officers into neighbourhoods, but that will not make up for the 1,100 officers and the £148 million we've lost due to budget cuts. And before he mentions plans, that will still leave us 400 officers short. So why have the Tories failed so badly to get police officers onto the beat?
Minister.
Well, as I mentioned in earlier answers, across England and Wales, we do now have record ever police numbers, 149,572. The previous peak was 146,030 in 2010. So we have 3,500 more officers than we have ever had before across England and Wales. In Northumbria since 2015, the number has gone up by 512. Of course, many of the powers do sit with the PCC, including powers over the precept, and it's entirely open to police and crime commissioners to use those powers.
Thank you,
Mr. Speaker. Today, Op Centurion has started across Lancashire, utilising £2 million from government to put more police officers on our streets tackling ASB. In my constituency, that means an almost 2,500 extra hours of police patrols in Padiham. But we can do more. It will have a major impact, but we can do more. So could I ask the Home Secretary whether the Safer Streets Fund will have another round so we can make physical changes as well as getting more officers on the streets?
Well, I'm very delighted with the progress being made to tackle antisocial behaviour in Burnley and Padiham. As my honourable friend will know, we've allocated almost £1 million to roll out pilots of ASB hotspot response in 23-24. There is a new round of Safer Streets being announced very soon. And I just want to take this opportunity to thank Lancashire Police. They've launched an ASB problem-solving unit. They ran Operation Propulsion, which involved more officers patrolling locations, dealing with motor nuisance and boy races, and they've had a real good crackdown on residential burglary thanks to Operation Defender. Neighbourhood crime has fallen by 26% in Lancashire. Tribute must be paid to Chief Constable Chris Rowley and the Police and Crime Commissioner Andrew Snowden.
Thomas Shepherd.
Given the exchanges earlier, I'm obliged to ask the Home Secretary if she understands the difference between using a cruise ship for the temporary accommodation of Ukrainian refugees with a shared language and experience who have the right to work and who are being actively relocated in the community, and on the other hand using it essentially as a prison ship for the indefinite long-term detention of asylum seekers who have no right to leave, no right to work, no right to benefit, and no recourse to public funds. Does the Department appreciate the difference?
Minister.
I'm disappointed by the honourable gentleman's remarks. He knows perfectly well that the proposition was not a prison ship. This is a ship that's going to be used in exactly the same way as the SNP government did in Scotland, and exactly the same way as the Belgian and the Dutch governments are doing in their respective areas. And if I may say this, Mr. Speaker, in Edinburgh today, there are 37 asylum seekers. That's disgraceful. If the SNP cared about this issue, they would step up, support asylum seekers. If they don't, they'd back our bill.
Anna.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. People in Southend West want to see a tough but just policy on illegal immigration that stops people unfairly jumping the queue, that stops evil people smugglers, and above all, stops vulnerable people drowning in the Channel. So will my right honourable friend agree that we must continue to send a strong signal that it is this government, not unelected lawyers or criminal gangs, who will decide who comes to this country? Good point.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. At the core of this question is who decides who comes to this country? Is it for the government and Parliament, or is it for people smugglers and human traffickers? We, on this side of the House, know exactly which side of this debate we're on. We want to stop the boats. We want to secure our borders.
The family of my constituent who fled Sudan have been stuck in Egypt for over 2 months awaiting a spousal visa. 4 of the 5 of the group have UK passports. Could the Minister tell us how long he would expect people to be waiting in this kind of situation when they've suffered such distress and anxiety?
Well, I'd be happy to look into the case for the Honourable Gentleman, but I can say to him that we are processing applications in third countries within service standards. We have closed the visa application centre in Khartoum for obvious reasons to protect the security of our staff and contractors, but we have teams in Egypt, in Saudi Arabia and in other close countries who are there to support applicants like his constituents.
Teresa Villiers.
Given this morning's U-turn by the Mayor of London on selling off Uxbridge Police Station, does the Minister believe that he should also act to save Barnet Police Station? And if he doesn't, his decision on Uxbridge looks like cynical political game playing and interference in the by-election.
Minister.
Well, I and many other Londoners were concerned when Sadiq Khan, I think it was in 2017, announced plans to close 37 police stations. Thanks to the resolute campaigning of local councillor Steve Tuckwell in Hillingdon, Sadiq Khan has executed a last-minute handbrake U-turn under pressure, I'm sure entirely unconnected with the upcoming by-election. And my honourable friend is absolutely right. If Sadiq Khan is to have any credibility at all with London, as he currently has pretty much none at all, he should reverse not just this one police station closure plan, but all of his police station closure plans.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Using the maximum police precept on council tax, having to tap into £500,000 reserves, and yet again relying on grant funding, shows that the Bedfordshire PCC has failed to secure the long-term funding our force really desperately needs. And now he's off pursuing his personal ambitions as the next Tory candidate in mid-beds. So the review of police funding is welcome, but when will the House see it, and will it be before summer recess?
Minister.
Well, I can't set out a precise time frame. It is being actively worked on. But I would like to just point out that the Police and Crime Commissioner for Bedfordshire, Festus, is doing a fantastic job for the people of that county. And it's thanks to his active and energetic, persuasive and eloquent interventions that Bedfordshire has received these special grants. And their base budget also gone up by £6.1 million this year, thanks to Festus's fantastic work.
David Davis.
Mr. Speaker, last week Nigel Farage publicised the cancellation of his bank account under the politically exposed persons regulation. But he is only the latest of a number of people to have their lives wrecked by this regulation. Recently, Lords in the other place have tried to correct this policy with only partial success, I understand, because of pushback from the Home Office and the security services. Can the Home Secretary explain why this is and what she's going to do about it?
Secretary. Oh, Minister.
Well, I'm delighted to be asked a question today. May I say, yesterday the Treasury and the Home Office came together and agreed various things that were announced in the Lords, actually, which was the PEPs agreement. So this sort of closure on political grounds, if that is indeed what has happened, and after all we only have the allegation of it at this point, should be completely unacceptable. PEPs is there to prevent the corrupt use of banking facilities by politicians in corrupt regimes. It is not here to silence individuals who may hold views with which we may or may not agree.
So the Select Committee, Dame Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration's latest report on the Home Office system to remove foreign national offenders, he said the Home Office does not have a firm grip on its caseworking operations, and this is no way to run a government department. He also said, I found the Home Office's inability to provide reliable or consistent data and management information of particular concern. So given this, could the Home Secretary explain how the department will cope with the increase in casework, detention and removals planned under the illegal immigration bill?
Minister.
Well, of course, we do take that report, as all others, very seriously, and she's right to say that there are lessons to be learned. I would say, however, that returns are increasing. That's as a result of deals like the one we've done with Albania. It's as a result of reforms like those we've made to the National Referral Mechanism, and it's also as a result of the 50% increase in illegal working visits that we've secured this year alone.
Aggie through.
Mr. Speaker, despite repeated assurances from the dispatch box and nearly 8 months on from when I first raised the issue with the Minister, The Home Office continues to operate 2 wholly inappropriate accommodation centres in my constituency, putting an unbearable strain on public services. Will my right honourable friend now expedite a clear timetable to close these centres permanently and restore the hotels back to their intended purposes?
Well, my honourable friend and I have discussed this on many occasions, and she has very doggedly campaigned for the closure of these hotels, as well as supporting the steps that we're taking as a government to stop the boats in the first place. I'd be happy to have further conversations with her, but she has my assurance that we are working as fast as possible to clear all hotels, including those in her constituency.
Luke Pollard.
Speaker, last week the government rejected a number of the recommendations from the inquest into the tragic mass shooting in Plymouth in 2021. This has caused serious concern with some of the families of the victims. So can the Minister explain why he rejected the coroner's recommendations and whether all the ones he is consulting on will be implemented by the end of this calendar year?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question and for the meeting we had with the families a few weeks ago. And as I said to him on the phone last week, whenever he and the families are ready to have further discussions with Home Office officials, they are ready to do that. The timing of that will be guided by the honourable gentleman. In terms of the substance of the government's reply, there are some things we've committed to doing straight away. For example, the MPCC have been funded to set up an accredited training programme for firearms officers. That was one of the recommendations. In due course, that will become mandatory. There will be a thematic inspection of all firearms licensing by the Inspectorate next year. And as I said to the House a few months ago, I asked the Inspector to specifically re-inspect Devon and Cornwall's firearms licensing. They're doing that, and they should be reporting by the end of July. The vast majority of the recommendations made by the coroner and indeed by the IOPC and the Scottish Affairs Committee in connection with the Isle of Skye shooting are being openly and neutrally consulted on. So the government doesn't have a position. It will consult openly and respond once we've got people's replies to the consultation. There were 2 particular recommendations he refers to and that the government didn't feel were appropriate for the reasons set out in the document, but the vast majority of recommendations are being openly consulted on, and some of them we've taken action on already. And I just thank him again for his campaigning on this issue, which I know the families are very grateful for.
Davidson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently visited the Uxbridge police station to hear about the valuable work its officers do to serve my constituents as well as those in Uxbridge and South Ruislip. When the Mayor announced the closure in 2017, Hillingdon Council offered to buy the site at market rate and provide a £500,000 revenue contribution and leaseback arrangement so those valuable services could continue to be available. But the Mayor said that was completely impossible. So other than the relentless campaigning of Hillingdon Conservatives and Councillor Steve Tuckwell, can my right honourable friend suggest any reason why the Mayor's decided to keep it up?
Mr Simmons, I think you need a German debate, not a topical question. See if you can pick the bones out of that.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his excellent question. I mean, the answer is no, I can't think of anything other than the tireless campaigning by Councillor Steve Tuckwell and others that has forced the Mayor into this last-minute, self-interested, screeching U-turn. But I'd like the Mayor to do a U-turn on all the other police stations he's threatening me closure to.
Can I just say, look, you're going to be here a while yet. Very Sherman.
Mr. Speaker, is the Home Secretary concerned, recent revelations about the investigation into the Stephen Lawrence murder and what happened during the Brinks-Matt aftermath, is she concerned that some of the social organisations, out-of-work organisations, that our police belong to?
Home Secretary.
Well, the recent reports relating to the Stephen Lawrence case are an operational matter for the police. It's something I cannot get involved in, nor should I. That is a judgment for the police on operational and casework decisions within which we don't interfere. But when I just say, I think that we have a good track record when it comes to the Met in terms of turning around performance. Mark Rowley's turnaround plan and his leadership efforts to restore confidence, rebuild trust with London is working, and we need to back him to get the best results possible in London.
Nick Fletcher.
Mr. Speaker, there is a tweet at the moment going around regarding a man who identifies as a trans woman. The tweet reads, "The trans-identified man who appeared in an ITV news report about mothers has posted an image breastfeeding their baby. Do you think it's okay to mock women like this?" I think that's a valid question, but I'm also extremely concerned for the welfare of the child. Will the department look into this for me, please?
Home Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, whilst we, of course, respect all of the rights of those in the trans community, it's obviously clear that biological men cannot breastfeed. But, Mr. Speaker, it's quite remarkable that we have gotten to a position where the Labour Party leader can't actually define a woman. I think he said something like 99.9% of women don't have a penis. On that basis, we can't actually rule him out from running to be Labour's first female Prime Minister.
Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My Norwegian constituent Sarah has been waiting over 6 months for a biometric residence permit, a period which means she can't work, access free healthcare or leave the country. Will somebody do something and get her the status she deserves switching on with her life?
Minister.
I'll be happy to look into the case for the honourable gentleman.
For the Polybill.
The number of foreign national offenders eligible for deportation has now reached a record of almost 12,000. Almost 4,000 of these left prison more than 5 years ago, and even those who are volunteering for deportation are still here. Will a minister get a grip on the deportation department within the Home Office and make sure that these people are chucked out of our country?
Minister.
Well, the honourable gentleman is absolutely right. We want these individuals to leave the country as swiftly as possible. The published figures show that F&O returns have increased following the pandemic in the latest 12-month period ending December 22 by 14% compared to the previous 12-month period, but quite clearly there's more work to be done.
Tim Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Liverpool City Council is a city of sanctuary. We currently have 237 Afghan families in a Afghan hotel, languishing there for 2 years. The council have to rehouse these families by the 11th of August. Can the minister say what will happen if we're unable to find suitable accommodation? Will they be made homeless and thrown out on the street?
Minister.
Well, the Minister for Veterans Affairs and I have launched a programme that provides significant support to councils like Liverpool to help individuals to find alternative accommodation. That might be in the private rental sector, it might be in social housing. But I think we can all agree on the principle that it's not right for individuals or families to live in hotel accommodation for over 2 years. We need to help those people out of the hotels this summer.
Chris Stephen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It will come as news to the Immigration Minister's claim earlier to the Labour and Conservative coalition who run North Lanarkshire Council. And I also a surprise to a Director of Mears who confirms to me that North Lanarkshire Council house not just asylum seekers but refugees. When is the Immigration Minister now 3 times has given factually wrong information to this House? When we apologise to this House, and will we come back to it to give proper information?
Well, I don't think I have given factually wrong information. It may not be the facts that the honourable gentleman wants to hear, but they are the facts. I didn't mention North Lanarkshire, but now he does. There are 6 asylum seekers in North Lanarkshire. There's more to be done here. I think the honourable gentleman would agree.
That completes questions.